Good afternoon, members of parliament, support staff, radio listeners, TV viewers, those following via social media, and members of the media. Welcome to the continuation of this meeting of the Committee of Public Housing, Spatial Planning, Environment and Infrastructure, number 3 for today, Monday, June 22nd, 2026. I would like to give a special welcome to the Honorable Minister of Public Housing, Spatial Planning, Environment and Infrastructure, Mr. Patrice Gomes Jr., and his support staff. We've established a quorum of 4 factions with 9 members, seeing that this is a third party being present. Please stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. I received a notice of absence from the following members: MP Rayan Peterson, MP Kotai, MP Omar Atli, MP Duran, MP Arian due to work, and MP Westcott Williams also out for work. I have not received any notice of lateness. Are there any notifications? I see MP Roseburg would like the floor. MP Roseburg, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would like to take the opportunity, seeing that it was Father's Day, to wish all the fathers happy Father's Day still, seeing that this was our first meeting. To all the role models, keep doing what you're doing for your children and for the ones that you're guiding. And for the fathers, it's still an opportunity for the ones that haven't got the opportunity to show up, to still show up for their children, because a child hasn't asked to come into this world. So I want to like to make use of this opportunity to wish all the fathers a happy Father's Day. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Roseburg. I see MP Lewis would like the floor. MP Lewis, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Chairman, the Honorable Minister and his support staff, those in the Tribune, and also to my honorable colleagues and to the people of Sint Maarten. Chairman, I would first like to congratulate the association, the ACP Sint Maarten movement, for their efforts in organizing a successful march of protest. With regarding to the NVGEBE crisis, I personally came out and stood amongst my people, and I saw the unwavering support, the fearlessness displayed by the people of Sint Maarten, Mr. Chairman, who stood and continue to stand for the right and the right to be heard. I would also like to thank Ms. Arundel, our temporary manager of GEBE, for her cooperation and listening and understanding the concerns of the people who participated in the march. On a sadder note, Chairman, I would like to extend my sincere condolences to the family for the young man whom is known as Warzi, who tragically passed away over the weekend during a shooting that claimed his life. I would like to send my condolences to his family, his friends, and his fellow loved ones. Mr. Chairman, I sincerely hope that the persons responsible will be apprehended and prosecuted to its fullest extent. I would also like to go on, Mr. Chairman, after I received some information this morning pertaining to the accident of the young gentleman, Mr. Ryan Gomes. I understood, Mr. Chairman, that the person is going to be released and turned over to the Immigration Department because of lack of evidence. If that information is accurate, Mr. Chairman, I would like the prosecutor's office to actually do their due diligence. My job is not to interfere in an investigation, but I do not think justice will be served if someone hit and run, turn themselves in, and turn around. Now I'm understanding, if that is so, that the individual is going to be released and turned over to immigration. That is not justice, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you for your notifications. I see MP La Cruz would like the floor. MP La Cruz, you have the floor.
A blessed afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Griffier, Honorable Minister, his support staff, my fellow colleagues here in Parliament, and all those listening and watching via social media. Mr. Chairman, I want to first thank SZV for a job well done, properly organized. I have now experienced going away on medical with my son. personally, and there's some work to be done, but his operation was successful. Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank Dr. Royman, a proper job done. Villa de Lily, the hospital, and the housing that takes care of our Sint Maarten people over there, Bellanova, job well done. Mr. Chairman, there is still a lot of work to be done. I have now experienced a whole different category, a whole different way and manner of dealing with patients and people that are in need. And we have a lot of work to do here on Sint Maarten. So, Mr. Chairman, the minister responsible for SZV could look out for a letter, because I'd like to have a meeting with them to iron out some wrinkles and see exactly where they're going and how they're moving forward with the healthcare in our country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP La Cruz, for your notifications. I don't see any other need for notifications at this time. So we go over to the agenda points for this meeting, which is agenda point 1, discussion on the current state of the national housing in Sint Maarten, including government's planning, land use, and institutional capacity on the IS 1057/2024-2025, dated May 19, 2025. And agenda point 2, follow-up discussion with the Minister of VROMI on cemetery capacity, development planning, and related infrastructure policy. That can be found on the IS 396-2025-2026, dated November 26, 2025. These agenda points were requested by MP Darrell York. This meeting is a continuation of the meeting which was adjourned on March 20th, 2026. It is good to know that during notification, the minister has provided clarification on the questions, statements made by the members of Parliament. Today, the Minister of Public Housing, Spatial Planning, Environment and Infrastructure, Ms. Patrice Gums, Jr., has returned to Parliament to provide the answers to the questions posed by the members of Parliament. We go over to agenda point 1. Discussion on the current state of national housing in Sint Maarten, including government planning and institutional capacity. At the meeting held on March 20th, 2026, the requester of this agenda point was given the opportunity to clarify his request, after which the minister gave a presentation. Members of Parliament were then given the opportunity to pose questions to the minister, and agenda point 1 was thereafter adjourned. At this time, I give the floor to the Honourable Minister of Public Housing, Spatial Planning, Environment and Infrastructure, Mr. Patrice Gums, Jr., to answer the questions posed by the members of Parliament at agenda point 1. Minister, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of Parliament, those viewing and listening online. Mr. Chairman, is it possible we are experiencing some technical difficulties with the questions for agenda point 1? Could we ask for proposer indulgence to begin with agenda point 2 while we rectify the responses for agenda point 1?
Yes, I'm looking to the members. I don't see anyone saying that they disagree. So I hereby adjourn agenda point 1, and we move on to agenda point number 2. Minister, you have the floor for agenda point 2. So just to be clear, agenda point 2 is a follow-up discussion with the Minister of VROMI on cemetery capacity, development planning, and the related infrastructure policy. Yeah? Which the Minister is here to answer the questions for that.
Yeah, thank you again, Mr. Chairman, members of Parliament. Once again, to the viewing listening public, good afternoon. Allow me to just acknowledge an important milestone of this month. Marks the 30th anniversary of the Sint Maarten Housing Foundation. So I wish to express great congratulations to the foundation as it continues to steward on behalf of the Ministry of VROMI the portfolio of public housing. There are challenges, but I think we have really been working closely together to find further alignment to improve the housing needs for the people of St. Maarten. So once again, to the members, the board, and the employees of the Housing Foundation and the tenants that they serve, congratulations to you as we continue to improve and enhance services to the people of St. Maarten. I move first to the questions of MP Darrell York. The MP's first question: am I correct in understanding that Area 4 of the Cul-de-Sac Cemetery vaults will be placed ad hoc in currently open spaces? Through you, Mr. Chairman, Area 4 has been used in the past by the hospital and other medical institutions as an area for medical waste. This method is no longer being applied. The opportunity we are seeking is to construct vaults on top of this area, similar to a vault complex seen at higher elevations in the cemetery. So not individual patches of vaults spread over this area. Is there a formal cemetery capacity forecast based on mortality trends and burial practices? And what's important to note is that a large number of these questions were actually directed in collaboration with the Ministry of VROMI, especially when it comes to the policy questions. So just if there's any further clarifications, of course, you will have to then take that into consideration. At present, there is no formalized cemetery capacity forecast in place that is systematically based on mortality and burial practices. The Ministry of Public Health, Social Development and Labor, VSA, is currently in the process of upgrading its mortality data systems. This enhancement will improve the accuracy, timelines, and analysis of mortality data. Once fully operational, this data will provide a stronger evidence base to support, among other things, future cemetery capacity forecasting and planning. It should also be noted that the burial practices are evolving. This consideration and potential introduction for expansion of cremation as an alternative to traditional burial may over time have an impact on land use requirements and overall cemetery capacity needs. These developments will be taken into account in the future policy and planning considerations. The following question: is the size of the space allocated for the new cemetery based on mortality trend data? The exact size of the space has not yet been determined. Additionally, as previously indicated, there is currently no available data on mortality trends. What sites have been identified or assessed for cemetery expansion on or for a new cemetery? Right now, the focus is on the Belvedere remainder for a new cemetery. Has the Minister held any public consultation regarding the location of a new cemetery? The Minister has not yet held public consultations regarding the location of a new cemetery. However, it is recognized that public consultation will be a necessary component of this process. Such will require coordinated engagement between the Ministry of VSA and, of course, VROMI. Public consultations will be facilitated at the appropriate stage once preliminary assessments and interministerial coordination have been completed. What is the timeline for decision-making on cemetery expansion? What milestones and specific dates should the public expect? The matter of cemetery capacity and potential expansion is recognized as an important issue, and ongoing discussions are taking place regarding the identification of potential areas for designation. However, these discussions are still at an exploratory stage and have not yet progressed to a point where concrete timelines or decisions can be communicated. Given that cemetery expansion requires a coordinated approach across spatial planning, public health, environmental considerations, and land availability, for which we have secured, further assessment and interministerial alignment are necessary before defined milestones can be established. What has been done since the Minister's previous appearance in Parliament months ago regarding the matter? From the side of VROMI, analysis of the land in Belvedere has taken place. Additionally, vault capacity has been secured in the Cul-de-Sac Cemetery. Interministerial policy discussions are ongoing, and as we stated before, the finalization of the purchase of land took place earlier this year. Have any operational reforms been considered for burial management? Cremation and grave reuse are also alternative options that are being looked in for burial management. Have any policy reforms been proposed or implemented to improve burial management going forward? At present, policy reforms have not yet included the development of a burial policy by the Ministry of VSA. However, initial discussions have commenced to determine how this matter should be addressed, including consideration of grave reuse, cremation as an alternative burial practice, and related operational arrangements. These matters remain at a preliminary stage, and no comprehensive reform package has yet been formally adopted. Is the Minister proposing to maintain the existing historical burial site on the south green side of the while establishing a new burial site on the north? This is the orange side. Would this result in effectively having two cemeteries on one plot of land? Is dividing burial grounds across both sides the most efficient use of space? The intention is to preserve the existing historical ground site while developing additional burying capacity on the same broader plot. That's, of course, Belvedere South for the housing, and Belvedere and the cemetery, and Belvedere remainder south for the cultural and historical conservation. Whether this will ultimately focus... No, end of the question. Response, sorry. Given the orange area is approximately 130 square meters, how much of this will be allocated to burial use? At this stage, it's not yet possible to determine exactly what proportion area will ultimately be allocated for burial use. Two key prerequisites must first be addressed. Policy aligned with the Ministry of VSA, an updated and formally adopted burial policy is required. This will establish clear parameters regarding land use, capacity requirements, spatial standards, and long-term management considerations for burial grounds. Two, preliminary spatial mapping and site mapping. A comprehensive preliminary site layout must be developed, taking into account broader land use priorities, including current and projected housing needs. This exercise will define optimal zoning with the area and ensure that burial functions are integrated in a balanced and sustainable manner. In addition, public consultation may be both valuable and necessary to ensure community alignment, transparency, and acceptance of the proposed use and location of burial facilities. Until these steps are completed, any indication of the exact size or exact location of the burial allocation would be premature. After accounting for burial space and infrastructure, how will the planned housing targets still be achieved? The achievement of the housing targets as outlined in newly established housing policy is not solely dependent on the availability of this specific site, but rather on a comprehensive and multi-instrument approach to housing delivery. The policy framework is deliberately structured to leverage several parallel mechanisms, including government-led social housing initiatives targeting vulnerable and priority groups, private sector investments facilitated through incentives, partnerships, and enabling regulatory framework, and finally, optimizing of the existing housing stock, including the rehabilitation and reintegration of abandoned and underutilized homes and buildings into the market. As such, while the allocation of the land for burial use and supporting infrastructure may have an impact on this development within this particular site, it does not materially undermine the broader housing targets. These targets are designed to be met across multiple locations and through diverse instruments. Importantly, now that the policy has been formally established, the Ministry's immediate focus shifts to the mobilization implementation phase. In this context, the integration of burial space within the broader site planning exercise will be managed in a way that maintains alignment with housing priorities. Moving now to the questions of MP Francisco La Cruz. Can Parliament receive a copy of the burial policy or applicable law mentioned in the presentation? Indeed, this is begravingsverordening, and the link is provided, and of course we will forward a hard copy if necessary. But just for the record, it's https:// lokale regelgevings.overheid.nl/CVDR142030. Regarding spot number 4, why are medical remains not cremated instead of taking up burial space? Medical remains are subject to separate public health, mortuary, and institutional handling protocols. The management of such remains does not always fall within the same framework as ordinary burials, and cremation may depend on the nature of the remains, the applicable procedures, and the operational arrangements in place. This issue, therefore, requires consideration within the broader context of healthcare, waste, and mortuary management, rather than the general cemetery capacity alone. Is it possible to be buried on one's own private property on the Dutch side? In principle, burial on private property on the Dutch side is generally not permitted. Burials are regulated and are expected to take place in authorized burial grounds in accordance with applicable legal and public health requirements. Any exception would require a specific legal basis, the necessary approvals from the competent authorities, and compliance with the burial ordinance, the National Ordinance on Spatial Development Planning, and applicable development plan and zoning rules. Is a cemetery expansion included in 2026 budget? The cemetery expansion is not budgeted in 2026 budget. However, there is a CapEx request included in the draft budget request of 2027. Have alternative solutions been explored in light of population growth? Cremation and grave reuse are also alternative options that are being looked into for burial management. Has cremation or other space-efficient burial systems been considered? Indeed, these have been considered and previously mentioned as well. Are current burial ceremonies compliant with environmental and public health regulations? Yes, current burial ceremonies meet the required environmental and public health safeguards. Please also bear in mind that our laws outline that new or expanded cemeteries need ministerial approval, should have 50 meters or more buffers from homes and wells with proper enclosure or equivalent to limit nuisance and protect groundwater. This is Articles 15 to 18, as well as Article 16. Graves must be minimum 1 meter deep, covered by more than 65 centimeters of compacted soil, and this is Article 23. When a burial fee is paid, does the family become the owner of that piece of land? If the land is not owned, can another unrelated person later be buried above the grave? The intention of the burial fee is solely for the costs associated with burial work itself. That is, the preparation and closing of graves. It is not for the maintenance or leasing of said space. When a vault is built on top of another grave, the ministry strives to use or reserve that space for close family members. Moving now to the questions of MP Veronica Janssen. Can people living on the Dutch side of Sint Maarten be buried on the French side and vice versa? If so, what are the criteria for Dutch side residents to be buried on the French side? Burial on either side of the island is subject to the laws, policies, and administrative requirements of the relevant jurisdiction and cemetery authority. In practice, this means that a resident of Dutch side may only be buried on the French side and vice versa if the applicable criteria, documentation approvals, and space availability requirements of that side are met. The exact criteria would therefore need to be confirmed with the competent authorities on the French side. Given capacity issues, are there discussions between both sides of the island regarding burial capacity? What is the current status of the coordination or agreements between the French and Dutch sides concerning burial arrangements? At present, there is no formal bilateral agreement in place concerning shared burial capacity between the Dutch and French sides. However, given the ongoing capacity concerns, coordination dialogue between both sides may be expected where relevant. Any such arrangement would need to take into account the separate legal, administrative, and operational frameworks that apply to each side of the island. Moving now to the questions of MP Archwell Irian. For clarity, was the division between the green and orange parts of this land sales agreement? Does the sale documentation specify which portions fall under ECIs and which under VROMI? The division between the green and orange parts reflects planning and zoning coordinations identified during the acquisition and spatial assessment phases. It was broadly demarcated as such within the original land sales agreement, specifically having the northern part of the housing and then later negotiated to acquire the southern half for cultural and historical purposes. Did the land sellers explicitly state that they do not want a burial ground on certain parts of the property? Which specific areas did the sellers indicate were acceptable for burial use? The sellers did not explicitly prohibit burial use in any given area. However, sensitivities related to cultural heritage and environmental considerations were communicated. Death rate and frequent funerals, why is the urgency around vault shortages not clearly reflected in the presentation? How close are we to critical shortage of vaults? How imminent is the risk of running out of burial space? The presentation did highlight the urgency elaborating on the challenge to continuously stretch the current space at the cemetery. It also mentioned the burial rate of 14 to 16 burials per month and the amount of vaults being built in order to keep up with the demand for space. Also highlighted were the 5 areas where we foresee opportunities for further expansion. Also on the slide, we showed a satellite imagery that shows basically these 5 areas may be the last opportunities based on the current practices within the Cul-de-Sac Cemetery. Hence, why the focus went to the newly purchased land in Belvedere. Therefore, the urgency is operationally acknowledged and acted upon. How far along is the burial policy and spatial planning with VSA? At present, there is no concrete burial policy from side of the Ministry of VSA or integrated spatial planning framework in place from side of the Ministry of VROMI as it relates to burials. That matter is acknowledged and will require further interministerial coordination to move forward. Will the ministry fulfill the promised pilot project for the KB Cemetery? Yes, the pilot on KB Cemetery will be fulfilled. Why was there no update on the pilot project promised to the KB community? That is not true. The KB community and Ministry of VROMI are in regular communication regarding activities in and around the cemetery. Can the road leading to KB Cemetery be cleaned up? Indeed, this can and will, of course, be looked into to what level of intervention is needed from the side of government. Would it be permissible to place a burial ground along the roadside? Even if the government wanted to, is it legally or practically allowed to place a burial ground on the roadside? The placement and establishment of burial grounds in Sint Maarten are governed by the applicable legislation, including the Begravingsverordening, the burial ordinance. In accordance with this legal framework, burials may only take place on officially designated and approved cemeteries. It is noted that some of the existing cemeteries on Sint Maarten are located adjacent to public roads. These cemeteries, however, were historically established and formally designated for burial purposes and are typically secured by fencing or other barriers to ensure separation from public infrastructure and to maintain safety, dignity, and order. The fact that these cemeteries are situated along roadways does not imply that roadside areas are generally suitable or permissible for establishment of new burial grounds. Any new cemetery must meet strict legal, spatial planning, environmental, and public health requirements. This includes, among other considerations, formal designation and approval by the competent authority, compliance with the zoning and land use planning regulations, adequate distance from residential areas and infrastructure, and finally, appropriate layout, access, and safeguarding measures. In practical terms, the establishment of a burial ground directly along a roadside without proper designation and without meeting the above requirements would not be permissible. Should the government consider the development of additional burial capacity, this would need to take place through a structured planning process, ensuring that all legal, environmental, and public standards are fully met and that the location is appropriate for such use. Mr. Chairman, this brings us to the end of the questions as it relates to agenda point 2 on cemeteries and related infrastructure, and I look forward to any more questions or clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Gums. Is there a need for additional discussion on this topic? I look over to the floor. I see MP Lewis. MP Lewis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. Minister, I've started listening, as you saw, that I didn't have any questions. I do not even know if I was to the last meeting. However, in your response to the questions, I find it's very vague. in your response when it comes to mentioning when questions are asked, and even if it's a yes or no question, you broaden it and you're saying the competent authority. I would like clarification based on whom is the competent authority and how do we reach by reaching wherever we want to go when it comes to talking about the burial grounds or in cooperation with the French side and the Dutch side when it comes to burial. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, MP Lewis. I see MP York would like the floor. MP York, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to your SG, honorable colleagues, and Minister and the support staff. Via you, Mr. Chairman, I asked the Minister about if there was a formal capacity forecast based on mortality trends in burial practices. However, the Minister said that there are no, at least I understood from the Minister via you, Mr. Chair, that there are no burial trends. However, I have been made to understand that statistics such as how many deaths, cause of deaths, age, sex, groupings of ICD diagnoses, length of stay, all these things are submitted quarterly to the Inspectorate Department. So basically, mortality trends do exist. So I don't know if there's a breakdown in communication between VROMI and VSA, if VROMI even asked VSA, but these things do exist. Aside from that, the Minister stated that there has been no public consultations as yet. However, he already knows, the Minister already knows where averagely the burying ground is going to be in Belvedere Annex, somewhere in Belvedere Annex. So when the consultation does happen, what exactly is being consulted if the locations are already identified? So if the Minister can expound on that, I think the residents of Belvedere would like to know what exactly, where their input is going to be taken into consideration. As well, in determining how much space is going to be needed for the burying ground, being that space was already purchased and to be allotted, if there's no, when would the capacity forecast be completed? Seeing that there's no capacity forecast, there has been no consultations, there has been no assessment of the land, I would like to know when are these things slated to be done? Because things that we put out is being disseminated, and we don't want wrong information to be put out, because right now the residents of Belvedere is expecting of Belvedere and Rice Hill are expecting a burying ground in the vicinity. They don't know when, they don't know how, they haven't been consulted. So I'd like the Minister to expound on these things. As it pertains to the current cemetery, I remember there was a tentative date of when it was going to be closed, but I think that was prior to the additional vaults being installed or the spaces being identified for the additional vaults. Correct me if I'm wrong. What the Minister referenced it, but he didn't go into details. What amount of available spaces do we still have, and what is the projected closing date for the existing current burial ground in Cul-de-Sac? Also, what are the state of affairs as pertains to the burial ground in KB? Because I remember there were things being done. I would like to know what the update is as it pertains to that. Has the ministry considered land use alternatives, operational reforms, and policy reforms related to burial management? Because the Minister referenced that there's no document of its kind. What are the... Because in the Minister's presentation, Mr. Chairman, I get a lot of... I don't want to use the word fluff, because there was information given, but they were not... I think we all listened to it, but we still don't know what to expect, right? So if the Minister can give some timelines, some tentative timelines, something that we know what to expect moving forward, so we don't ask questions when we already supposed to know what is supposed to be coming. So if the Minister can expound more on giving some precise information based on what his ministry, and I would say the ministry, seeing that VSA also has to do with it, plan to be doing. And I think that would be it for now, Mr. Chairman. Oh, wait, 1 second. The burial policy versus land availability, because the minister came out with a housing policy and a housing plan. Well, he explained some details from the housing plan, being 1,200 houses are basically dwellings. That all has to do with space. So if the minister already knows, has an idea for his housing plan, I think that goes adjacent with whatever space is going to be allotted for the housing. So basically, the minister should already know how much space is going to be allotted for the burial. Because I understood the minister said those things are not set in stone as yet, but the minister in December 2025 released 1,200 homes. So he has to know how much space that's going to need for both infrastructure and the dwellings, and what's going to be left over for the burial space. So I would like the minister to expound on that and give some numbers, because to understand that everything is still being planned and everything is still being discussed while the minister has been speaking on this for almost a year now, I think by now he should be able to give some data and some timelines and some numbers. Otherwise, I question what has been released up to now. And that will be it for now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, MP York. I look to the floor. I see MP Veronica Jansen-Webster. MP Jansen-Webster, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. Good afternoon to my colleagues and to the minister, and welcome to him and his staff. I just had a similar clarification to the MP speaking before me on the mortality data, that besides VSA, the Census Office, Civil Registry, on the General Affairs, publishes every year how many deaths, births, and immigration and emigration. And also the Stat Department has that data. And I would think that VROMI, who handles all of the deaths over all of the years, has a database as well as with all of the registered burials that take place. You would have the most accurate database, I would think. So I think that it's an important question, and it would be good if we could, seeing that you could get this information, if you have to go and come back, let's say with a second round, that you could still look up this data and answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Jansen-Webster. I see no other MPs needing the floor at this time. I look at the minister. Minister, how much need to answer the questions that were posed to you?
Probably just 10 minutes.
10 minutes? And also, is there an update on agenda point 1?
Yes, I'll just verify that during the 10-minute break as well.
Okay, I adjourn till 3:05. Meeting adjourned. Good afternoon and welcome back to the continuation of this meeting. We now give the floor to the Honourable Minister of VROMI, Minister Gums, to answer the questions. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of Parliament. To the first clarification we received from MP York, and we actually like to combine the responses both to MP York and MP Janssen. The question was related to the statistics and mortality rate present within government. Well, VROMI. I want to clarify the information currently available to the Ministry of VROMI is limited to the number of burials for which the ministry provides assistance. We clarify that averages already between 14 to 18 per month. The Ministry of VSR, however, maintains additional data from a public health perspective, which provides a more comprehensive view of mortality trends. It should also be noted that all individuals who pass away on Sint Maarten are not necessarily buried on the island. So within the purview of the Ministry of VROMI, we know how many burials take place. If indeed, as stated on the floor, there's more detailed information, this is the information that we received from the Ministry of VSR. These trends are not available, are not necessarily documented, but as pointed out by 2 MPs, it is indeed. So if anything, we would recommend a follow-up with the Minister of VSR on those particular topics when it relates to age, cause of death, as we just know, for example, how many burials we do, and again, accounting for the fact that not everybody who dies is actually buried on Sint Maarten. In the development of a new cemetery and burial policy, it is therefore essential that all available statistical data be consolidated and assessed in close collaboration with VSR, as pointed out. I'd also like to reiterate that the policy mandate for cemeteries and burial matters falls under the Ministry of VSI, and as such, as stated, the Ministry of VROMI does not have that data within its immediate purview. Within this framework, VROMI's role remains focused on the physical establishment and maintenance of cemetery infrastructure, as well as providing infrastructural support for burials. The clarification from MP York: what will the scope of the public consultation as relates to the cemetery in Belvedere be? The decision to allocate land for cemetery was taken for housing and cemetery was taken in 2023. The current phase of consultations will focus on conducting a comprehensive Jan-Loos analysis to determine the most suitable areas, while also engaging stakeholders to obtain their input on the optimal use of the land. These consultations will further consider infrastructure requirements and key environmental factors to ensure that development is both appropriate and sustainable. What is the capacity forecast expected to be ready for burials? With burial forecast within VROMI, we have, as stated, we've observed about 14 to 18 burials on average every month over the last few years. With regards to the current Cul-de-sac cemetery, what is the current capacity and what is the expected closure date? As stated before, there is no current limitation to the Cul-de-sac cemetery, as there is no defined limit to the existing cemetery's footprint. We do know that the most easily accessible areas are increasingly limited, and why reuse and repurpose of plots and areas is being considered. To clarify, we never indicated a final closing date. What we did indicate that once the new site is developed, we will move to redesign the Cul-de-sac cemetery along more modern and structured burial management practices. Has the ministry considered reforms to address cemetery and burial practices? Yes, as stated, there are ongoing discussions related to incentivizing cremation and fees attached for prolonged burial or use of plots. The latter has already been discussed with cemetery stakeholders, but requires an amendment by VSA to the existing legislation. Burial policy versus land availability. Does the minister already have a plan on how much space is needed to support the 1,200 homes in Belvedere? As stated in this policy, the presentation and the responses, 1,200 homes are not going into Belvedere remainder. This number is to be realized across Sint Maarten and does not only include building new buildings, but also repurposing existing structures. As such, the total amount of space for the 1,200 homes cannot be established at this time. And finally, the clarification from MP Lyndon Lewis, who is the competent authority as relates to burials. that is the Minister of VSR. With that, Mr. Chair, I think I've come to the end of the clarifications. If anything else is needed, feel more than welcome to answer.
Thank you, Minister. I look to the floor. I see MP York would like the floor. MP York, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, in answering one of the questions pertaining to mortality trends, etc., the minister referred us to follow up with VSR. But Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to understand how the minister is planning to conduct a forecast capacity study and not have all the data readily available to himself in his ministry. I understand if the minister were to say, okay, this is not something the Ministry of VROMI can do on their own, and it will be a cross-ministerial something between VROMI and VSR. But to just say, okay, this is just the 1 or 2 data points that we have, and the rest, you guys will have to look at VSR. Minister, I think via you, Mr. Chairman, to come to a number, to come to a space, to have a holistic view of what is to come, you need to know the data that is there. And if you don't know the data, I don't understand how are you planning for the future in realizing these things if you're referring us to VSR when you're the one executing via you, Mr. Chairman. Also, the minister referred to new burial management practices. So basically, after the new burying ground is open, they will be doing repurposing or whatever the cul-de-sac burial ground. So basically, families that have their loved ones there, what are they to expect with that explanation? Is it that the remains were going to be exhumed? What is to be expected by saying new burial management practices and policies for the existing cul-de-sac cemetery? I also asked for update on the KB cemetery. I didn't really get that from the minister as yet. Maybe he forgot it, but I would like to have an update on that. And Mr. Chairman, one thing that's reoccurring, and I understand if it's not in pen yet, but I have yet to hear any projected timelines, any dates. Everything is up in the air. Everything is still being discussed. Everything is still being planned. But the minister has been speaking on these things for a better half of a year now. So if we can't get a date to when he expects to start the public consultations for the new burying ground, when the new burying ground is going to be open, there's no formal end date for the current burying ground, but basically by now they were supposed to know what the capacity or the formal capacity is and what they could be able to add from that as it relates to the amount of burials per month, how long that's going to last. I think something should be available, maybe not an exact timeline for it to be closed, but basically, hey, we got 6 months, we got a year, that we don't have to worry because people out there are worried, Minister. So can the minister give some type of information that people can actually hold on to and that's tangible? And also, what is to be discussed during the consultations? I didn't get that as well. So if the minister can clarify on that. And that would be it for now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, MP York. I look over to the Honourable Minister. Minister, you have the floor to respond to MP York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I just want to clarify, when I stated the referral to the Minister of VSR, I stated in my responses the information that we have received at the time of request of the answers was that there's no mortality trends. On the floor of Parliament today, the MPs indicated that indeed there's a location of where these can be found. MP Janssen, through you, Mr. Chairman, indicated that if a return is necessary, that's possible, but I also then indicated that when it comes to the topics around mortality trends, that then the best, most competent authority would be the Minister of VSR, as that information itself was communicated not be available to us. If it is indeed available, the most efficient way of handling would be to the Minister of VSR. That was where the point of my suggestion came from. Not that I am passing on the responsibility, of course, but as I stated, we know how much people are buried every month. We don't know the cause. We don't know necessarily where everyone ends up, because that's not necessarily within the data we collect. We don't collect in the Ministry of VROMI that someone died from a particular disease or not. We just compile how many people are buried, and that information has been communicated, 14 to 18. If a more thorough discussion around mortality, i.e. health, i.e. cause of death, i.e. where people are going, diaspora-wise, immigration-wise, then that has to be taken up by the competent authorities who have that type of information. I, of course, can come back with the information from those relevant ministers, but if the objective is to get an efficient and clear answer, it would actually make a lot more sense to have the competent minister or ministers present that have that data, and the conversation and responses can come a lot more efficiently and faster. So that was just a bit of clarification to what I said when I indicated the need for the data and other ministers coming along as well. This is also why, as stated, the Ministry of VROMI, and I think it's very important to recognize the request of timelines is well noted and taken. I think it's also very important to recognize that the belief of having a closure date for the cul-de-sac cemetery is not possible, simply because we currently don't have any other public cemetery that's readily available for all persons of all denominations, of all backgrounds. Other cemeteries are limited in terms of who they actually accept. Second to that, I think it's very important to look at the question within the timeline of what has taken place. We recently purchased Belvedere Remainder. It will be talked about in the questions related to the housing. We recently finalized a land analysis. So I think to ask the questions about costing, exactly where things are going to go, it is premature, as stated in the presentation and responses, because all of these things are currently happening now. Has there been a discussion for a very long time about this parcel of land? Indeed, even before my mandate, but I think it's important to recognize what has happened within this year alone. We've purchased land and we've analyzed land this year alone. So I think to look at how many houses actually can go where, the cost of those houses, those are things that I already indicated and will indicate in this presentation are the next steps. Those include mobilization, realization, of course, financing. Financing isn't something that we have right top of our head, because as the housing policy rightfully indicates, the future of housing is not solely in the hands of government. The future of housing is a multi-stakeholder approach that includes government but also private sector. So how much funding and financing is needed also depends on who takes the lead in what intervention. So I think, and I want to make it very clear, the possibility of indicating how many houses where, as well as exactly the cost of those things, we cannot give those now because we're now doing our research. The land was purchased this year. Analysis took place from January until just last week, 2 weeks ago, and that has been finalized and now being reviewed for operationalization as well as financing as well. So I do hear the call of the MP through you, Mr. Chairman, about the urgency, but I think it's very important to recognize that while we have an urgent need, the ministry is doing short-term initiatives within the existing cul-de-sac cemetery, as indicated, additional vaults where the hospital medical waste used to go. These are short-term interventions that we already know can carry at least a certain amount of time. But to give a conclusive date of where we're going to close the cemetery, that of course depends on when we have a new area that's properly financed to actually manage a new cemetery. And then there was a final, oh, this is one last clarification. Yes, exactly. The MP had some questions about public consultations, what's to be expected, new cemetery availability. Of course, The first question about public consultation, what we expected, and I think it's important, as we stated before, to recognize that the initial purchase of this property for housing in a cemetery were already communicated quite some time ago to the public. What ended up happening recently was actually the finalization of that process. What is very important as well to recognize is that given that the public already knew before this purchase that it was communicated by the government that this land was going to be purchased for said purpose, I think what's important at this point is to actually make sure that the community is engaged in the sense of, as communicated, what is actually going to happen, referencing access, referencing environment and safety, and well, overall health. So in the public consultations, what government plans to present is actually its plan for the cemetery following the land analysis being completed, which will then indicate sort of the areas that are best suited for a cemetery within the land that we have, and that's already communicated as having taken place in terms of the land analysis that's completed 2 weeks ago. And I think what's very important as well, the new cemetery availability depends very largely on the financing model. It's be very irresponsible of me to actually close this existing cemetery and not maximize its potential use to then go into a new cemetery that I can't afford to build or maintain. So I think what's very critical in this, that yes, there are urgent needs for burial. That's exactly why the ministry is using more short-term intervention. Families and persons wish to actually have a more long-term use, the introduction of burial fees and use of land fees. Currently, as indicated, you pay a fixed amount to the Ministry of VROMI. That's really only about closure of the building and closure of the burial site. Long-term, and as done as many other countries, actually a rental fee that has to be paid for the maintenance and use of the space, given it's a limited asset. So those are the things I think that people, we indicated in the presentation as well, can begin to expect. But of course, the introduction of a fee requires an amendment by VSA to this legislation because it's not currently accommodated for within the law. With that, Mr. Chairman, I think I've reached the clarifications and yield the floor.
Thank you, Minister. I see MP York would like to give some additional clarification or question. MP York, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I feel with one point, the Minister and myself, I don't know if we ended up playing a game of semantics. I'm going to use the words of the Minister to pose the question again. So the Minister, I think the Minister understood that I was pushing for an exact date of the cul-de-sac burying ground to be closed. That was the initial question, but the follow-up questions were different. The follow-up questions, and to use the words of the Minister, to carry on a certain amount of time, referring to the additional spaces to be constructed, found in the existing burying space in cul-de-sac. My question was, that same amount of time that the Minister of Value, Mr. Chairman, is referring to, what is that amount of time? That exactly, that sentence when the Minister said to carry on a certain amount of time, my question is, what is the amount of time that the Minister is referring to? I'll go even deeper. Carry on a certain amount of time to reach its full max potential. So what amount of time will it take before the burying ground, through these extra measures, before it reaches its max potential use? That's what I mean. As well, and lastly, going back to the initial thing about the mortality trends, I understand very well, via you, Mr. Chair, that VROMI only gets the 1-2 points of, hey, this is how many deaths per month, this is how you guys got to plan moving forward. But if we're looking into constructing an entire new burial site, we're not building for today, we're building for tomorrow, right? And the numbers that be given to the Minister now are for now. If you're building for later, you have to know the trends and all the data, the trends, whether VROMI executes that study or not, whether it's a cross-ministerial study, but you have to know the exact trends across the board before you could even say, hey, we need this amount of land to allocate for this use. If you don't know the trend, how can you allot a certain amount of land regardless of financing? Because you got to know what you need in order to go look for the money. That is what I mean. So I fully understand for VROMI it doesn't matter about sex, it doesn't matter about speciality. I understand all those things, but for the bigger picture, it does matter. Or else what will this forecast study be based on? That's the whole question, or the whole reason behind my questioning for that point. So I would like the minister to understand, it's not about what VROMI has to their access to now, but seeing that they're building something for the future where VSR is also included, will there be cross-ministerial working to figure this out? Because how else will you get to that number of what you will need for the future? And again, I don't know if it's being skipped purposely or not, but I'll give the minister the benefit of the doubt, so I'll pose it for a third time. What is the update on the KB Cemetery? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP York. I look at the
Clearer where we're going, I will be able to offer more updates on that to Parliament where necessary. Yep. Yeah, okay, yes, indicated to the expected lifetime of Cul-de-sac Cemetery. I think it was mentioned in our presentation, and I think it was March, February, where the current vaults we were building offered about 6 months of space. And then, of course, we have the second site, that as was communicated, where historically medical and medical waste was deposited. So the current project that's being built has about 6 months of vault, so that's April, go forward to 6 months, and then, of course, we start back again with the new interventions that will give us a certain amount of space. We're also looking at, so it depends on how much vaults we can get in that space. On average, when we build these new interventions, we're looking at least half a year worth of coverage. So whatever new intervention will provide at least 6 months going forward to 2027, and then again, another intervention. I also want to just preface this as well, because and I do take the point clearly and really truly that there is a limitation to space, but I also want to point back that the idea is not that when we open up Belvedere as a new cemetery, we're no longer going to reuse cul-de-sac. It's exactly stated that the idea is to actually fundamentally change how cul-de-sac is currently utilized. Those persons, of course, who are unable, for example, to identify loved ones in cul-de-sac, which is very much common, those sites will be repurposed in future for future burying ground sites. It's very sensitive in terms of course, a discussion of having people know their loved ones won't be there any longer, but I think it's important to recognize a large part of Cul-de-sac Cemetery remains unidentified in terms of who is located where, and the ministry does already have the legal ground to repurpose those sites. And, but of course, what we want to do is, of course, going forward, have the use of fees that actually then allows us to revolve after a given time who's buried where. I think that's very important in terms of more sustainable land use, which is limited for burials. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Minister. I see MP York would like the floor. MP York, you have the floor.
Just one last quick question for clarification. Understanding the plan to repurpose the existing burying ground, and one of those practices would be the exhumption of bodies, not bodies, remains. So the question would be, can the minister clarify, does the minister plan on executing and starting this during his term?
Thank you, MP York. I turn to the Minister. Minister, you have the floor.
Yes, this is actually something that we're in discussion with all cemetery stakeholders, because beyond cul-de-sac itself, there's also a strain on space in the Simpson Bay, as well as the Cape Bay cemeteries. And actually, in our initial stakeholder consultations with cemetery representatives, they actually indicated that if this is what has to be done because of limited space, they fully understand. I think what needs to be done, of course, is more sensitization around that actually being realized. Because it's one thing if the law says you can do it, it's another thing when you need to exhume persons who people know exactly where they're located. So of course, the more practical solution would be in areas where there's sort of abandoned or unrecognized or unknown graves, to have those be the first places that we intervene, and then from there maximize that use until we get to the more sensitive areas that require a bit more community engagement.
Thank you, Minister. I see there are no further comments, so I hereby close this agenda, agenda to close. And we will continue now with agenda point 1, which is the discussion of the current state of the national housing in Sint Maarten, including government planning and institutional capacity. At this meeting held on March 20th, 2026, the requester of this agenda point was given the opportunity to clarify his request, as I mentioned earlier in this meeting. So, Minister, you needed some time to go to agenda point 2, and you're ready right now? Okay, so I'll give the floor to the Minister for agenda point 1. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Agenda point 1, as we recall, dealt with the overall state of housing in Sint Maarten, and in particular the proposed housing policy that we presented in February. I'll begin first with the questions from MP York. Has a comprehensive master plan been finalized for the development of 1,200 homes? Were the numbers for social, affordable, and free market housing projections based on a finalized plan? A single consolidated master plan has not yet been finalized. The policy intentionally adopts a modular phase and multi-site development approach, allowing flexibility across districts and development type. Has an infrastructure capacity assessment been conducted for roads, drainage, sewage, and utilities? That we have the answer for. Is there? I'll come back to it. I think that has unfortunately disappeared, but I will come back because I know that answer is there. Here we are. Are there plans to upgrade or expand primary and secondary road access to accommodate increased traffic? The Ministry of VROMI and VROMI are undertaking traffic mobility studies for Sint Maarten. As stated in the presentation and in the policy, the 1,200 homes are across Sint Maarten. There will not be 1,200 homes in Belvedere as part of this project. From the side of the VROMI, there are ongoing discussions towards the improving of the road network. This includes enhanced road quality, improved efficiency of current road network, and structured and reliable allocations for road maintenance and network investment. Has a traffic impact study been conducted? Will the traffic impact study results be made public and shared with Parliament? Interministerial mobility studies are currently being developed. Once finalized, it will be determined in what way the information may best be shared with the public, including Parliament. Has a I think that's supposed to be hydrological and stormwater drainage study been conducted for the Belvedere Annex area? How will the runoff be managed to prevent flooding in downstream areas? Are retention ponds, culverts, or sustainable drainage systems planned? How will government ensure development does not overburden existing drainage infrastructure during heavy rainfall? In January, the ministry brought in an intern who, as part of his thesis, carried out a review of the drainage in the area. As part of the assignment was to present as resilient of a development as possible, use of natural drainage as well as sustainable drainage systems, including retention ponds and bioswales, were incorporated. The most simple explanation of what a bioswale is that a bioswale is a vegetated, shallow, engineered channel designed to manage and filter stormwater runoff, reducing pollution and promoting groundwater infiltration. What is the current capacity of the sewage and wastewater treatment systems in the Belvedere area? Can the current sewage system accommodate the additional load of 1,200 homes? The recently completed sewage treatment system on the Dutch Quarter roundabout is more than adequate to manage inflow, as it was designed to service Bethlehem, Defiance, Belvedere, and Dutch Quarter. The older system near to the border will require upgrades, as it is already too small for the current flows. Important to note, once again, the targeted 1,200 homes referenced in the policy are not all envisioned for Belvedere remainder. Can the minister provide a detailed implementation plan with timelines, milestones, and responsible entities? The ministry has finalized the purchase of the land and the land analysis. Discussions on development and financing models have begun. Once these are finalized, adequate timelines can be realistically communicated. What is the annual housing delivery target? Are the previously stated amounts 30, 40, 50 units still accurate? If not, what are the updated delivery targets? The policy proposes 120 units per year for 10 years. Considering the policy runs from 2025 to 2034, we may consider adjustments to accommodate for the ongoing mobilization phase from the side of government. Important to note is that the ministry is currently reviewing building permit requests with the policy in mind. These units, given access to private financing, will most likely be achieved ahead of government, which is exactly what is considered within the policy. A multi-stakeholder approach. Has a phased execution strategy been developed? As the policy sets out a joint private and public approach to delivering the housing, several factors will need to be considered as to priority areas, given that the policy covers social, affordable, and market needs. From the side of government, the focus is on the newly purchased Belvedere remainder, as well as supporting the housing foundation with existing inventory development. What districts or areas are considered priority under the phased strategy? And I'd like to use the same answer, Mr. Chairman, if that, through you, for that same answer. As the policy sets out a joint private and public approach to delivering housing, several factors will need to be considered as to priority areas, given that the policy covers social, affordable, and market needs. From the side of government, the focus is on the newly purchased Belvedere remainder, as well as supporting the housing foundation with existing inventory development. What is total estimated budget required between 2025 and 2035? The total estimated budget is contingent on the developmental model chosen and specific to government what role it will play in the development of any identified housing project. What funding sources have been secured? Funding options will depend on the project lead for a given housing project. Discussions have already begun with several financial and non-financial institutions to determine market appetite for future developments. Has a cost per unit analysis been conducted for social and affordable and free market housing? No direct cost per unit analysis has been carried out, especially as it relates to the Belvedere site. The recent purchase and the initial land analysis have taken place. This will inform the larger development plan for the area. What safeguards exist to ensure long-term affordability, particularly for middle-income earners? Affordability over time is safeguarded through the combination of regulatory, supply-side, and financial mechanisms embedded in the policy. The policy sets production targets for affordable housing, promotes densification and reuse of existing stock to lower costs, and introduces financial instruments such as subsidies, mortgage guarantees, and rent-to-buy schemes to improve access. Monitoring and periodic adjustments of affordability thresholds by the minister further ensure that the system remains responsive to market conditions. What definition is used for affordable housing? The policy adopts a clear income-based definition. Affordable housing means housing that costs a maximum of 30% of the median net income. For the 2025 baseline, this equates to approximately 900 guilders per month. And this was, of course, stated during the presentation regarding the reality of the market and, of course, what it means in terms of subsidies, as well as what it means in terms of the poverty study that was being undertaken by the Ministry of VSA. What mechanisms will safeguard affordability over time? Mr. Chair, I would like to repeat that affordability over time is safeguarded through a combination of regulatory, supply-side, and financial mechanisms embedded in the policy. What happens if affordability safeguards are not implemented on time? If affordability safeguards are delayed or not implemented, the policy anticipates continued housing market failure, where the majority of residents remain unable to access adequate housing with a high cost and limited supply. This will exacerbate inequality and increase reliance on informal or substandard housing. In parallel, it will contribute to ongoing brain drain among young professionals and key workers and weaken economic resilience. Ultimately, failure to act in a timely manner risks undermining the delivery of the housing program targets, housing policy targets, and worsening social and spatial challenges across the island. Has the minister considered inflation and affordability projections? Yes, and the intention is to measure and evaluate in the coming years as the policy implementation is underway. What is the total number of emergency homes constructed post-hurricane at Union Farm, Foga, Cold Bay, South Reward, and St. Peters? Post-Hurricane Lewis, 200 in 1995, 1996, 200 emergency homes were constructed. What is the current management status of these emergency homes under the Sint Maarten Housing Development Foundation? The emergency homes are administered by the foundation. What formal agreements govern management, maintenance, and administration of these emergency homes? This is administered via management agreement. Were these emergency homes intended to be temporary or permanent? The emergency homes were intended to be temporary in nature. How are current occupants classified? Tenants, beneficiaries, or owners? The current occupants are classified as tenants. What is the long-term vision for these emergency housing projects? Important to note, some of the land parcels on which these emergency homes exist does not belong to government, but private individuals for which a rental arrangement exists. As such, any long-term vision for these homes and their residents must take this into account. Is government considering transferring ownership or selling these homes to occupants? Currently, there is no plan in place for transfer of ownership to the current tenants. Important to consider is what was stated with regards to the ownership of the land on which these houses occupy. Rent-to-own solutions are proposed in housing policy and can be considered where applicable on government-owned property. What is the short, medium, mid, and long-term vision for the Housing Development Foundation? The Housing Foundation short and mid-term goals are the repair and upgrade of existing units. Long-term additional units are envisioned on land already in the Foundation's possession. Discussions continue on the potential allocation of additional plots currently in government's ownership. Can the Minister provide an overview of planned and ongoing housing projects for the next 3 to 10 years? From the side of government, Belvedere remainder, this may of course evolve into a partnership with the Housing Foundation and private actors. The Housing Foundation also has plans regarding expansion of Blue Mountain development and 2 additional areas, one in Cold Bay and one at Garden Defiance. What is the total outstanding loan portfolio of the Housing Development Foundation? The Housing Foundation is a private entity with a subsidy, and as such, this information cannot be shared at this time. Is the housing policy document ready? Yes, at the time of this question, I believe the housing policy was being finalized. And of course, going into the MP's second question on the topic, when will the housing policy be submitted to Parliament? The housing policy was submitted to Parliament on February 3rd, 2026. How does the housing policy connect to the land policy? The housing policy will be used to inform the land issuance policy. That is to say, government's land issuance policy will consider the needs and recommendations outlined in the housing policy in setting criteria and priorities in the land issuance policy. Where specifically will the 1,200 homes be built? Stated in the policy, the aim is not the building of 1,200 new homes. The policy outlines new construction as well as repurposing. This is to be carried out by various stakeholders, not only the government, and there is no specific areas identified for the construction or repurposing of homes. How much land remains available for housing after accounting for cemeteries, culture, recreation, and infrastructure in Belvedere? Belvedere Remainder North is the area allocated for housing and a cemetery. This remains unchanged and totals 130,219 square meters of usable land for both cemetery and housing needs. The inclusion of the second parcel, Belvedere Remainder South, is the parcel allocated for cultural and historical conservation. What is the housing capacity of the existing Belvedere area? The current Belvedere housing project consists of 474 homes. Where exactly will the cemetery be located and how much land will it occupy? In the site analysis undertaken, there are a number of proposed sites, but there is not as yet a final decision on the location of the cemetery, What control mechanisms exist if the policy fails to meet its criteria? The policy proposes several control and adjustment mechanisms, including a housing market monitoring system, a dedicated housing officer within VROMI responsible for monitoring the housing program and reporting to the Minister and Parliament, annual action plans and budgets to guide implementation, and the ability to adjust the policy based on success and failures. However, the policy does not include or establish a formal penalty or legal fallback mechanism if targets are not achieved. What KPIs, key performance index indicators, reporting structures, and corrective measures are included in the policy? Although not mentioned in the form of a formal KPI, the policy includes monitoring and reporting arrangements. A housing market monitoring system is to be developed, a dedicated VROMI housing officer responsible for the monitoring and reports to the Minister and Parliament. VROMI is assigned the responsibility to set and monitor of the housing program. They are tasked to develop a vulnerable housing dashboard as input for monitoring. TEAT is to gather data needed by VROMI for monitoring. And the policy states that monitoring is needed to track successes and failures and to address the policy where necessary. Does the policy address the full scope of the housing problem or only future developments? The policy addresses both existing housing problem and housing problems and future developments. It does not focus only on new construction. It also addresses the shortage of social and affordable housing, limited mortgage access, the need for urban renewal, especially in shanty towns, reuse of vacant or underused buildings, subdivision and house splitting, and better use of existing urban area because land is, of course, scarce. It's also reflected in the target that at least 70% of the program should come through reuse, densification, apartments, and semi-detached townhouse models, rather than only greenfield development. Will eligibility criteria distinguish between civil servants and the general public? The policy does not establish separate eligibility criteria for civil servants versus general public, although it does identify civil servants and other key workers as an example of people who should be able to access affordable housing. Social housing eligibility in Annex 2 is based on criteria such as legal status and resident status, registration with the Sint Maarten Housing Development Foundation, guaranteed income source, tax compliance, not already owning or controlling buildable residential property, and income thresholds. For affordable housing, the policy states that this category should be accessible to residents within a median income and notes that teachers, health workers, and civil servants should be able to buy a home. What happens to individuals already on the housing waiting list? All persons are contacted prior to allocation of a house, and as such, the list is not a guarantee for housing, but presents the requester's situation at a given time. It helps to inform allocation based on availability and urgency. For example, person A may be on the waiting list for the past 3 years. If a unit becomes available, person B, who may have just come on the list but has a young child, may be given preference over person A. Is the existing waiting list accurate and still valid? In principle, the waiting list is accurate, but the Foundation requests that persons regularly update their status to be able to consider and accommodate specific and ever-changing needs. Here ends the questions of MP York. We now to the questions of MP La Cruz. Can priority access to housing be given to essential public servants, teachers, police, immigration, customs guards? I will revert back to the response actually given to the MP, but also want to add that, of course, considering the fact that the policy does indicate that those persons at those thresholds should, in principle, be able to afford a house, this is something that we definitely have to look at within the context of the Mortgage Guarantee Fund. Can government provide guarantees to support home ownership rather than rental housing? The Mortgage Guarantees Fund's reestablishment will offer this guarantee, thereby supporting future home ownership. Will foster children aging out be considered in housing allocations? The housing policy identifies the need for vulnerable groups to be considered, and this category is one that can be considered. Moving on to the questions of MP Janssen-Webster. Is government open to public-private partnerships for housing development? Indeed, yes, and this is outlined as one of the strategies in realizing the housing targets within the existing housing policy. Will government prioritize building permits for private developers constructing social housing? This indeed is one of the instruments being considered. The ministry is also taking recommendations from the policy as it relates to deviations on things like density and the overall impact of Article 22 of the Building Code to realize the housing targets. How many households are currently on the housing waiting list? Is the reported figure of 7,000 families accurate? The latest number from the Housing Foundation indicates there is about 4,000 requests. And I think what's very important to clarify is that the number of requests doesn't tell you exactly how many persons is actually in need. So they're existing currently about 4,000 requests. That could equate to 7,000 persons overall, but they're currently, the latest update is 4,000 requests for housing. Will new housing be administered by the Sint Maarten Housing Development Foundation? The policy presents multiple stakeholders in the development of housing. Only housing developed by or explicitly contracted to the Housing Foundation to be managed will be administered by the foundation. Are all board positions of the foundation currently filled? No, not all positions are currently filled. There has been some delay in the finalization of the process. This will be completed within short, and the positions will be advertised. Has a new director been appointed and started working? Yes, a new director has been appointed. His tenure began on May 5th, 2026. Who will determine allocation of the newly built homes? The allocation of newly built homes will depend on the lead developer. Currently, government administers housing via the Housing Foundation. There is room for stronger policy-led collaboration with the foundation, which is what this policy aims to achieve, alongside more structured approaches like the terms of reference for board members and the performance agreement. Will allocation follow the existing waiting list chronologically? Allocation of housing takes into consideration several factors. While chronology is one, consideration is also given to dependencies, especially very young children, and crisis situations. Which entity or task force will oversee housing allocations? Allocation is currently done by the Housing Foundation. This forms part of their management agreement with government. When will the land issuance policy be finalized? The land issuance policy is delayed by 1 month, and a first draft will be ready next month, July. Should people on land or housing waiting lists resubmit applications? Yes, persons must regularly update the Housing Foundation so that their most current situation can be considered when it comes to the allocation of a housing unit. What practical steps should citizens take to qualify for housing or land? As it relates to housing, the foundation asks that persons fill out necessary documentation. Housing is currently based on availability and specific categories, including chronology, dependency, and crises. As it relates to land, the housing policy will set out criteria for consideration. Once this is finalized, some practical steps can be communicated. How will fairness and transparency in allocation be guaranteed? The Housing Foundation envisions automation of home allocation in future. This forms part of the strategic plan towards enhancing service and overall transparency. What measures address mistrust and perceived discrimination in past housing allocations? Alongside proposed automation, metrics such as the performance agreement and the terms of reference for board members will support better oversight, KPIs, and improved governance. Is there a plan to resolve outstanding maintenance and repair issues in existing government housings? Yes. Is there a timeline for completing overdue repairs? Yes, the timeline is currently over a 5-year period. Will cleaning, garbage removal, and surrounding areas maintenance be addressed? Yes, this will be addressed and required within the existing maintenance plan. Will a maintenance plan accompany construction of new homes? Yes, important for this, of course, is the provision of reliable and structured financing. Will renewable energy, such as solar panels, be incorporated into new housing? Yes, and it forms part of the recommendations in the housing policy that assists to bring about sustainability and drive down the costs to residents. Will sewage issues in existing and new housing projects be fully addressed at construction stage? No blanket infrastructure assumption is made. Each housing site is conditional upon technical and feasibility studies for the specific infrastructure available in that area. All construction is to adhere to strict legal, technical, and environmental and health standards. Moving now to the questions of MP Archibald Irian. On what data set or demand model did the minister base the projection of 1,200 homes? Given that the presentation itself states that Sint Maarten lacks consistent, reliable, and up-to-date housing data. How can government justify hard numerical targets if simultaneously acknowledges that the underlying data is unreliable or incomplete? The projection of 1,200 homes is derived from Census 2022 population data, TEAT stat household trends, declining household size of 2.1 persons currently, historical housing permit issuance performance, and comparative benchmarks from prior housing studies. The policy intentionally sets achievable targets rather than exact demand fulfillment figures. If 25% of the population is eligible for social housing, why is the policy targeting only 120 units per year instead of a proportionate figure? Why is the government not aiming to meet the full 25% social housing demand based on its own stated data? If meeting that demand is unrealistic, what alternative strategy does the government propose? While approximately 25% of the households qualify for social housing, the policy acknowledges that meeting the full latent demand through direct government construction is not fiscally or operationally feasible. The annual target of 120 homes units reflects execution capacity, land availability, and assumed budgetary sustainability, and why public-private partnerships are very important in realizing these numbers. Has the government assessed whether focusing primarily on social housing is the correct approach? Yes, the policy deliberately adopts a balanced housing mix approach. While social housing is prioritized due to the acute need, the policy equally emphasizes affordable housing and market-based solutions to avoid dependency, crowd-out effects, and fiscal strain. What distinction does government make between social and affordable housing, and how is that reflected in the policy outcomes? Social housing is defined as subsidized rental housing provided primarily by public or non-profit institutions to the eligible low-income households. Affordable housing targets middle-income households and is largely market-derived, with price ceilings linked to median income. This distinction directly shapes allocation rules, subsidy eligibility, and zoning outcomes. Has the policy realistically accounted for inflation, construction costs, and material price increase over a 10-year horizon? Why were no financial inflationary sensitivity analysis presented alongside the housing targets? The policy explicitly recognizes inflationary pressures, high material costs, and imported construction dependencies. As a result, affordability thresholds, subsidy levels, and delivery targets are structured for periodic review rather than being fixed over a 10-year horizon. How does the government plan to execute 120 homes per year, given the track record of delayed or incomplete projects? In short, and to be clear, the policy does not state government is building 120 units per year, but supporting the execution of 120 units per year. Execution of 120 units per year is supported through phased development, reuse of existing stock, densification strategies, and institutional partnerships. The policy intentionally avoids reliance on large single-site developments to mitigate execution risks. Has government considered non-construction alternatives such as wage policy, tax policy, or subsidies to improve housing affordability? Would a housing subsidy model instead of direct construction be more financially feasible for government? Yes, the policy explicitly references non-construction tools such as mortgage guarantees, subsidies, rent-to-own models, tax adjustments, employer-based guarantees, and reduced transaction costs as parallel affordability interventions. How does the housing policy address the appraisal inconsistencies that affect mortgage accessibility? Why is there no additional standard or regulatory framework for property appraisals, including in the policy? Has government assessed whether current appraisal practices disadvantage local buyers? And this can also be used in the response, I believe, to MP Roseberg, through you, Mr. Chairman. The policy recognizes appraisal inconsistencies as a systematic barrier to mortgage access. While not yet codified in ordinance, the policy foresees closer alignment between accredited appraisers, cadastre data, banking criteria, and potential future regulatory frameworks. Were banks consulted regarding the Mortgage Guarantee Fund, referenced by the Minister? Have any institutions formally committed to participating in the Mortgage Guarantee Fund? Yes, institutions and the central bank were consulted during the policy development process. The Mortgage Guarantee Fund is administratively reestablished through ministerial decree, and we are currently busy with the foreign participation arrangements so that they can be finalized. How does the government intend to financially back the Mortgage Guarantee Fund, cash reserves, guarantees, budget allocations? Funding options under consideration include budgetary allocations, revolving guarantees, risk-sharing models with banks, and future earmark revenue streams. Final structuring will be coordinated in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance. Where in the national budget will the mortgage guarantee be reflected? If the fund is not budgeted, how can it be considered a realistic policy instrument? Once finalized, the Mortgage Guarantee Fund will be reflected transparently within the national budget framework, either as a guarantee instrument or as a dedicated fund in accordance with the public financial rules. Moving to the questions now of MP Waiver. How will the target of 120 homes per year be achieved given delays in the building permit process? How will the permit department handle additional demand while also serving the general public? Is there a clear operational plan that aligns housing targets with permit capacity? The ministry has increased capacity in the permits department, including in the client-facing vacancies. In addition, the ministry is working to digitize the complete permitting process. This is envisioned to be carried out in phases. What measures exist to speed up the permit issuance for this housing program? Important to note that this is what is being presented is not a program, but a policy. It offers recommendations that can be put into a program, such as development of the Belvedere remainder, where we do see permit requests that align with recommendations from the policy. The ministry has added these to the priority list. What operational adjustments will be made within the permit department to handle both the housing program policy and regular permit applications simultaneously? Additional short-term support is in place with two work streams addressing both new requests and older permits that form part of the backlog. Additionally, better workflow and communication are critical to ensuring output is up while managing employee health and well-being. More globally, the existing function book needs to be reviewed in tandem with digitizing the permit process. Moving now to the questions of MP Roseberg. Will the ministry include a formal supervisory regulatory framework for appraisers in the final housing policy? Will an official registry and disciplinary board for appraisers be established? With your indulgence, Mr. Chair, to the MP, we indicated that the answer previously offered could be used. If there's a desire to have me reread it, let me know.
Yes, please.
Yes? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. The policy recognizes appraisal inconsistencies as a systematic barrier to mortgage access. While not yet codified in ordinance, the policy foresees a closer alignment between accredited appraisers, cadastre data, banking criteria, and potential regulatory future frameworks. Was the banking sector consulted during development of the housing policy? Yes, the banking sector was consulted. Will enforcement mechanisms and consequences be addressed in the policy if it remains in draft form? Important to recognize the policy is not in draft, the final version of what was submitted, and as indeed indicated, there are no penalty or legal mechanisms currently within the ordinance, within the policy, but of course these can be taken up in further legal amendments should they be deemed necessary in future review. And then the MP's final question, how will disputes over rental prices be handled under the rental tribunal given the policy's new direction? The Ministry of AZ and Ministry of VROMI are in discussions as it relates to the operating of the new rental tribunal, including the movement of the tribunal fully under the Ministry of VROMI. Going forward, critical to resolving disputes is an agreement on benchmarks and clear rental agreements. The Ministry of VROMI, at the request of the Rental Tribunal, is also looking into the legal possibility of offering inspection support in times of inspection and dispute. Further discussion on this is planned in a subsequent meeting with the Rental Tribunal. And Mr. Chairman, we've come to the end of the questions, and I look forward to any clarifications should they arise or be needed.
Thank you, Minister Gums. I see MP De Wever would like the floor. No? No need? Okay, I see MP York. MP York, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a lot of points, as expected. Where to start? First off, based on one point, the minister started off by saying that this meeting is about the housing infrastructure and the housing policy. Although I know we did touch on the housing policy with some things, I would just like to make clear that this is not the meeting about the housing policy, so the minister still got to come back for that one. But we did touch on one or two things about the housing policy. I just wanted to clarify that one point. With that being said, Mr. Chairman, I asked a host of questions during the initial meeting, of which I don't understand what went wrong, but half were skipped, and I still had new ones for this meeting. So while the minister was answering, I was scrapping and making some adjustments, and they will go as follows. Mr. Chairman, the minister clarified a couple times that the 1,200 homes won't be 1,200 new constructed homes, but a mix of repurposing and new construction. I would like to know, and I think the people would like to know, of that 1,200, how much of that 1,200 will be newly constructed homes? And of that number, can the minister then divide it? Because I remember in December, the minister had a nice article explaining so much percent for social housing, so much percent for affordable housing, etc. Can he then give a breakdown of those, of that same type of breakdown for the newly constructed homes? And to go further on that, the minister elaborated on 120 per year. Can he expound on how 120 be broken down as well. And lastly, concerning that point, the minister made clear that the 1,200 homes weren't only for Belvedere Annex, but they will be divided amongst the several areas where government owns land. Can the minister identify to the public and for Parliament as well which areas are these and where are these homes going to come? Also, I asked if a traffic impact study is going to be conducted. I know that is a yes. And if so, can the results be made public and with Parliament? The minister said he will be looking at the appropriate manner in which to do so, but I didn't really understand properly if the study is finished, yes or no, and if it's finished, while the minister is figuring out how he's going to disseminate it, can we get at least when is it going to be slated to be disseminated to the public? Because I think that's something that has been announced over the last 2 years a couple times in the media, and I received several questions about that, and I have no answers to give. So if the minister can forward that information as soon as possible, would be very much appreciated. Also, the minister referenced a thesis that was done by a stagiaire. I'm very much interested in that thesis. I understand maybe I can't read it, but in the explanation of it, the minister used words like resilience and a couple different words, but I received a lot of questions saying, MP, what exactly did this stagiaire do for VROMI? And I couldn't give any answers. So if the minister can clarify in simple terms and simple terminologies what that thesis was about, what were the deliverables of the thesis, I think that would give a lot more clarity to the people of Sint Maarten. Also, I received several questions. I don't know if it falls under the Ministry of VROMI, but I know it, once upon a time a minister of VROMI was very vocal about it. But the flag at the Harold Jack site, has it been risen as yet? Because I know for Flag Day, the main area where our flag normally is risen was not raised. So has that been done in the meantime since then? I know that's not a topic, but I think it's a simple question that could be posed, seeing that I got that just now on my phone from the public. Moving on, so if the minister would be so kind. If not, he can just say, no, I'm not answering that now. As it pertains to the housing, has the government conducted a cost per unit analysis for social, affordable, and free market housing? So how much would that be costing per unit? What measures are being put in place to ensure densification does not overload the existing infrastructure? So I understood the minister said not everything is going in Belvedere area, but a significant deal is. But what is being done as it pertains to infrastructure around the areas where he did identify, or the government has identified, if they have identified where these houses are going to go? But seemingly, because we have an entire breakdown of so much percent this, so much percent that, I would assume these things already have been identified. And also, that goes pairs with an infrastructure capacity assessment to be completed in support of the project and the housing developments. What is the status based on that? I don't know if the minister touched on, maybe I missed it, when is the mortgage guarantee fund slated to be fully operational? And as it pertains to the housing units, in the, I don't know to call it the housing policy or the housing plan, but in the housing announcement, let's call it the housing announcement, maybe the minister could give it a name himself. In December, to be exact, the minister said that the plan was supposed to, not supposed to start, but the calculation started as of 2025, 120 houses per year, etc. Now I understand how the land had to be purchased, the plan had to be made, etc., etc. But seeing how ambitious the goal is, I would like to know, and the people would like to know, in the coming 12 to 24 months, what can the people expect? Tangible, right? So if the minister says, hey, MP, Parliament, don't expect any building to start before 2027, understood. But then what are the deliverables for 2026? What can the people expect from the minister in the coming 12 months? And then, let's say, 6, 12, 24 months. Because I think we have to move on from articles and lengthy explanations to tangible deliverables. Also, the minister referenced via you, Mr. Chairman, that in the housing policy or in his housing plans, there have been no provisions for civil servants specifically. And I remember I asked if any priority will be given to nurses, teachers, police officers, or anything of the sort. I didn't really get an answer. I think from what I can conclude, the answer is no. But I'd like the minister to clarify that himself because I don't want to put any words in his mouth. Are there any provisions for these specific and maybe any other specific functions? What is the ministry's current land use policy direction and where is it formally written down? Because, Mr. Chairman, new buildings can be constructed tomorrow on government land, but if we don't have a land use policy, how are these to be purchased or given or anything as it pertains to handover of property to anyone? So what is the status on the land use policy? Because, you know, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? If we're doing one, we can't do one without doing the other. So what is the status on that and what is the timeline for that as well? How many development requests are currently pending that affect housing? And what is the average processing time of those that are still pending? What is being done to align the housing policy with road access, drainage, sewage, utilities, schools, and public transport? Because I know now we have a housing policy. I don't know if this is the draft or the policy that the minister intends to move forward with, but how does it align with those areas of concern? Are there areas where the ministry is still allowing development without adequate infrastructure capacity studies? And as we speak about the plans, the ambitious plans of the ministry, does the ministry currently have the staff capacity to execute its housing planning agenda? Can the minister give the staffing numbers by department and vacancy count? Because it's very much essential. Because if I move on, which specific functions are currently understaffed currently right now? Policy, permits, inspections, GIS, project contract management, legal enforcement, and engineering. Because I understand through the minister's PPP, it's not clarifications because it is not an OVA. So it's a committee meeting, new questions can be posed. So as it pertains to that, Minister,
MP, just through me.
Via you,
but
Mr. Chairman. I was speaking to you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I know, but I'll answer the minister. Thank you, MP.
Are you going to answer the minister? You say you're going to answer the minister? Oh, okay. So yes, so as it pertains to the plans, no matter what structure is going to be executed, whether the government is merely going to be executing, merely overseeing, it's still a strain on the government capacity because one of these departments will have to deal with whatever is going to be done. So the question is, what is the ministry doing as it pertains to capacity? I understood from the minister a while back that they will be hiring a lot of people for the permits department. But for example, if you hire 10 more people for permits, what's going to be done with the inspection department? Because more construction being started means more construction has to be inspected. So I'd like to know from the minister what is his plans as it pertains to capacity. What has been done as pertains to institutional capacity in the last 6 months and what is going to be done with the capacity moving forward in the coming 6 months. What internal dashboard reporting structure or project tracking system is the minister or the ministry using to monitor progress? Because with such an ambitious project to begin, I would assume the infrastructures in place are going to be put in place to manage it. How are flood risk, climate resilience, hillside stability, and drainage being integrated into planning approvals currently? That's a new question. How are flood risk, climate resilience, hillside stability, and drainage being integrated into planning approvals? What policy changes are being prepared to stop avoiding development in places where infrastructure cannot support it? Also, the question was touched on about KPIs, about what KPIs will be reported publicly as it pertains to measuring the successes or lack thereof of any infrastructure policy or the housing policy moving forward. I understood from the minister that, via you, Mr. Chairman, that different ministries and departments are to be taken up in that, and that there are a lot of things to be done where that is concerned, still to be done, but they are not mentioned specifically in the housing policy as yet. So if the housing policy doesn't cover what KPIs have to be covered, how can then the various ministries and departments be tasked with doing certain things if it's not, if it doesn't derive from something? So if they have not been identified yet, how can the task be handed out to the different ministries? Because according to me, that would then have to come back into the housing policy. The deliverables that I asked the minister for, so hopefully he can give them, will these deliverables, or are the to be announced deliverables, are they reflected in the 2026 budget? Moving on, about questions as it pertains to the Housing Development Foundation, because the minister touched on it, but I don't believe it got its proper grace, I would say, because at the end of the day, Mr. Chairman, there are a lot of questions as it pertains to the Housing Development Foundation in the public, amongst residents, as it pertains to questions, not questioning the foundation, but a lot of things are unclear to residents as it pertains to that. So hopefully these questions and the answers to them will clear that up. The minister stated that the outstanding loan portfolio cannot be shared. I don't understand that one. So is it that it cannot be shared publicly, or it cannot be shared with Parliament? And if it cannot be shared publicly, can it then be sent in writing to Parliament? So that goes hand in hand with what is the current financial health and debt servicing capacity of the Sint Maarten Housing Foundation, and are there any risks of default or restructuring? So again, if that can be answered publicly, I'll accept that one in writing. What is the current composition of the board of directors of the Housing Foundation, including qualifications, appointment process, and term durations? What is the criteria used by government to appoint members to the Sint Maarten Housing Board, and how is transparency and independence ensured? Have there been any recent changes or concerns regarding governance, oversight, or internal controls within the management of the Sint Maarten Housing Development Foundation? And the answer was given to what is the current number of applicants on the waiting list. The answer, I think, was about 4,000. But if you delve a bit deeper, how has that number evolved over the last 5 years, in particular since Irma? So what was the number going into Irma and compared to the number now? Then I got a question during the minister's answers. If someone is interested in the Blue Mountain development, how did they go about that? Is it a simple just requested at the Sint Maarten Housing Foundation? Is there a site? What would be the steps for them to apply for that? As it pertains to the emergency homes and other housing, has the Sint Maarten Housing Development Foundation conducted any recent assessments of the physical condition of the homes and socioeconomic status of the residents? Exclamation behind the socioeconomic status of the residents. And if so, can the minister share the findings and the monthly maintenance per project, cost per project? What is the minister's vision in collaboration with the Sint Maarten Housing Development Foundation for the long-term future of these emergency housing projects? Because I understand as well, certain areas where they're on private land has been a discussion point for some time and a reoccurring discussion point. So what is the long-term plans? What are the long-term plans, if any, for those areas? Does the minister intend to provide policy direction to the Sint Maarten Housing Development Foundation to regularize land tenure and ownership for these residents, and if so, within what time frame? That'll be it for now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP. I see MP Labega would like the floor. MP Labega, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to the Minister's support staff. Minister, a few questions. Did the previous administration leave any type of housing plans? I know government's about continuity. Because you spoke about development plans, studies that need to be done. Were there anything for you to now add on to save some time? Also, you stated that not all the housing will be in Belvedere. I know depending on how the development is structured, you'll go up. So I know you can't really say how many houses will be there. And you also stated that the housing, the lands that's under the housing foundation will be also utilized, but do you also plan to utilize government land now that's not specifically already restricted for social housing developments? What's your thoughts on that? When you were here previously in your presentation, you said you would like developers, you would like investors to also indulge in the overall project. How do you foresee getting them to be interested in developing social housing over just more private, higher profitable projects? Is there a strategy that you guys plan to implement, or are there some incentives to get them to go this route? And if there are developers and investors interested, how do you recommend that they contact the ministry to discuss their ideas? And also for the government side of development, will there be a tender process for ideas? How do you plan to go about that? Because you don't have the funding. So the land's already purchased, but you don't have the funding, is what I'm understanding. So how are you plan to go about that to get developers and investors interested? That'll be all for now. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Labega. I see MP La Cruz would like the floor. MP La Cruz, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, through the minister, if the minister could maybe just in layman's terms explain what exactly is the Mortgage Guarantee Fund and what is its purpose? Because answering the question that I asked concerning teachers and police officers, it was more related to the fact that government owes the justice workers. So the question was, would it be possible that, let's say, for example, John is owed $100,000. We are fully aware that government does not have these funds to pay John the $100,000, but John does not own a home. So if government could, via the banks that we use, be able to take that part of John's mortgage and cover it, even if they have to pay interest, seeing that these monies are owed to the justice workers for a long time already. So that was the direction that I was going with that question. So if the minister could explain exactly what the Mortgage Guarantee Fund is, then I think I'd get some clarity on that too. Then, Mr. Chairman, the answer concerning the foster care children was somewhat vague, in my opinion. What I want to know from the minister, is it possible, and how? And if not, why not? We have kids that are outgrowing the foster care, and have nowhere to live. So that was basically the question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP La Cruz. Before I give the floor back to the Minister, this is something I've mentioned a few times. I just wanted a little update to see when I speak about when I used to be a minister and I had a conversation with the Housing Foundation, and we had, in essence, an agreement when it came to the housing by Foga Estate and also the one there in South Reward, the emergency houses, that initially the Housing Foundation stated that they had agreed somewhat to be able to turn over those houses to the individuals that actually are living there at the moment, that they had no objections in essence, seeing that the repairs at that time was also a lot in the financial situation of the Housing Foundation, but also to be able to then give home ownership to immediate home ownership to those residents. Is that something that you have discussed with the Housing Foundation, or is that, if not, is it something that you would be interested to discuss with the Housing Foundation to be able to generate immediate home ownership for these locals that are living there at the moment? Thank you, Minister. I look at you to see how much time would be needed.
Just looking at the number of questions, some of them require a bit more insight within the ministry. I think minimum 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. We can get back and confirm exactly when that would be, but we don't foresee coming back for another 2 weeks minimum.
Okay, thank you, Minister. We'll discuss it with the Secretariat from Parliament to discuss with you to see what time frame we'll look at when you return.
Yeah, thank you,
Mr. Minister.
I think just to add to that we'll just also coordinate with Parliament in line with the upcoming budget discussions as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you. I see. Sorry, MP La Cruz. No, but I think the Minister is looking to come back to answer all the questions that were posed in that sense. Yeah. So with that being said, I would like to thank the public and the Minister support staff for being here today and also for answering the questions. And hereby I will adjourn agenda point 1 until further notice. Agenda point 1 adjourned. Meeting adjourned.